My in-laws live on the outskirts of a small village in the south of England. Their house is one of 10 on a lane surrounded by farmers' fields. At one end of this row of houses is a small children's play area. Nothing fancy, just a square maybe 10 metres by 10 metres, with a couple of swings, a small climbing frame with a hut underneath, and an attached slide. A couple of those little rocking things, and a rope bridge. Like I said, it's nothing special, but whenever we visited, my 3-year-old insisted on being taken to play. Next to the park ran an overgrown walking trail. It ran alongside the farmer's field that sat behind the houses in the park, and into some trees at the back of the field. I didn't like visiting this park. Not only was it a little bit boring, though most parks are when you're an adult having to chase around a wild 3-year-old, but something about this park, and that walking trail beside it, just always seemed a little bit off to me. I could never put my finger on anything in particular, but I could just never really relax when I was there. This one particular time, my daughter had refused to leave, even when my wife and her mum had headed back to the house to get started on dinner. I didn't really mind because the more she ran around now, the better she'd sleep that night. It was starting to get dark, the setting sun casting long shadows across the playground and painting the sky a dark purple and pink, when I had to finally put my foot down and carry my daughter out of the park, with her crying in protest that she wanted to stay and play with her friends. There were no other kids in the park, but I didn't think anything of that last remark. 3-year-olds are always saying weird things, and I was too busy trying to avoid flailing limbs to pay much attention. By the time we've walked back to the house, she's calmed down. The temper tantrums are usually short-lived, thankfully. We have dinner and everything is fine. Afterwards, I step out into the garden to help my father-in-law move some stuff around. It's dark by now, only the light spilling out from the kitchen window and the full moon providing any light, so it takes us a little while to get everything sorted. Eventually we finish and step back into the house, and the first thing I notice is that it's quieter than usual. In the sitting room, my wife and mother-in-law are attending to our baby son. I ask where our daughter is, and my wife frowns and tells me that she went outside to help me. I hurry back into the garden, a knot forming in my stomach. It was dark outside, but not so dark that I wouldn't have noticed a loud 3-year-old running around. I searched the garden, and just as I thought, she wasn't out there. The knot in my stomach is getting bigger by the second, and then I spot that the side gate is open, leading to the driveway and then the road. It's not usually a busy road. As I mentioned, we're on the outskirts of a small village, but people do tend to use that route as a cut-through, and with it being a quiet country road, those cars tend to speed. Now, every parent knows that sense of dread that hits you when you find yourself in this sort of situation. For those non-parents out there, imagine that feeling when you're out and you check your pocket for your phone and it's not there. Then multiply that feeling by 100. I don't stop to explain anything to anyone, I just sprint out that side gate and onto the road. It's too dark out there to see anything, but I know where she'll have gone. Or at least, I hope I do. I race to the park, calling her name as I go, but get no response. I hit the gate of the park with force and it slams back into the fence with a resounding thud. I scan the park but I can't see her, though one of the swings is swaying back and forth. I frown. Someone must have been here recently. There's not enough wind to have made the swing swing like that, and the other swings were all dead still. A chill runs down my back, and I get the sudden sensation that someone is watching me. I call out to her again and listen carefully. At first, I hear nothing but my own heavy breathing and the rhythmic squeal of the swing. But then I hear it, the sound of small footsteps inside the hut. I breathe a sigh of relief and cross the park, ready to scold her for running off and hiding from me. With each step, I feel a rising tension. Again, I couldn't put my finger on it, but it was the usual unease I felt in this park, but much stronger. I felt unwelcome, and I couldn't wait to get my daughter and get out of there. I poked my head into the hut, calling my daughter's name, and it was empty. Completely empty. I stood up, heart in my throat. She wasn't in the hut. She wasn't in the park. But then, where else could she be? At that moment, my phone rang in my pocket, making me jump out of my skin. It was my wife. I told her to call the police while I continued to search. Desperate, I climbed on top of the climbing frame over the hut and looked around. I couldn't see much, but as I looked out over the farmer's field and then the trail running beside it, I froze. Barely visible, a dark smudge against a dark background, I see a small figure running down the trail towards the trees. I jump down from the climbing frame and vault the park fence. I'm just about to start sprinting down that track when, out of the corner of my eye, I swear I see a small child sat on that swing that is still moving. I turn back to look fully at it, and the swing is empty, but it's still swinging as fast as it had been when I arrived. I feel another chill run down my spine as I get the overwhelming sense that I am being watched, and there is this deep sense of hatred and hostility just emanating from that park now. I turn away and just run down that trail, desperate to be away from that park and even more desperate to catch up to what I'm just praying is my daughter. I call her name as I run, and I swear from behind me I hear the sound of children's laughter. I catch another sight of the child on the trail just as it enters the tree line and disappears into the darkness. I push myself faster, hope and fear driving me now. I burst into the darkness beneath the trees and stop, panting in the dark, unable to see anything. I pull out my phone and switch on the torch. It lights up the trail beneath me as it winds its way through the trees. Up ahead, I see the silhouette of a small child move off the path and into the woods. I run after it. I can feel eyes on me now as I move through the trees, that sense of hostility returning and surrounding me, and growing in intensity with each step. I'm not meant to be there. Someone or something doesn't want me to be there beneath those trees. I feel something hard hit the back of my head. I spin around to see a small stone land at my feet. Children's laughter fills the woods around me. Not the sweet, innocent laughter of my daughter. I can tell that this laughter comes from older children. I spin around, searching the trees for the source, but see nothing. Desperate, I scream my daughter's name, and then I hear it. A small voice calling, "Daddy?" Relief washes over me and I run towards the sound of her voice. I pass a large tree and stumble into a small clearing. Standing there, smiling, is my daughter. I scoop her into my arms and hug her tight, for the moment forgetting where we are, forgetting the fear and worry that I'd just been through, and just being grateful to have her back. When the embrace finally ends, I get a good look around the clearing, and I notice that at our feet are 3 small gravestones. Instinctively, I step back. I look at my daughter and ask her, what was she doing there? She just looks at me and says that her friends brought her there, that they'd wanted to show her something. The hairs on the back of my neck stand up, and that feeling of being watched, which had never fully gone away, intensifies once again. I try to ignore it and focus on my daughter. What friends? I ask her. My daughter points over my shoulder and just says, those friends. My stomach drops. I don't want to turn around, but I know that I have to. With a sense of dread, I look where she's pointing. Standing beneath the trees, just at the edge of my torchlight, are 3 small, dark figures. I can feel the hatred in their eyes as they glare at me. Then one by one, they turn and run into the trees. I rushed back down that trail as quickly as I can with my daughter slung over my shoulder. The sound of children's footsteps follows us all the way down the trail, but whenever I turn back to look, I can never see any of the children. We emerge onto the road, and I can hear the swing start to squeal again and more children's laughter coming from the park, but I refuse to look back again. By the time I make it back to the house, the police have arrived. I tell them that she just wandered off into the woods, leaving out any mention of the graves or the ghost children. I don't want them thinking I'm crazy. Thankfully, they're understanding and they just warn us to keep a closer eye next time. Me and my wife assure them that we will, and they leave us in peace. Over the next few days, I do some research on the area. It turns out, back in the 70s, 3 siblings had been playing at that park when a man had abducted them. He dragged them into those woods and killed them. They never did find out who did it. No wonder I'd experienced such hostility. I still haven't told my wife about my experience. I'm not 100% sure why. Maybe I didn't want to freak her out, or part of me thought that she just wouldn't believe me. Or maybe I just needed more time to wrap my head around it. Even now I was starting to doubt myself. Had I just imagined it? After all, it was very dark, and I was out of my mind with fear of losing my daughter. So, could it all have just been in my head? I'm not sure exactly when I made the decision, but after those few days of researching, I knew I had to go back, to visit those graves and make sure that they were real. In the daytime, of course. There was no way I was going back at night. But I needed to get something first, a peace offering to bring with me. So a few days later, I made an excuse to leave the house and pulled up by the park, my peace offering stashed in my bag. It didn't take me long to find the graves. I knelt down beside them. They were well weathered and worn, the names unreadable. I sighed and shook my head. I began to feel the weight of eyes on me again, not as intense as that night, but still there. I spoke into the air, hoping the kids would hear me, telling them that I was sorry about what had happened to them, that it was wrong, and that I hoped that they could find peace. Then I pulled 3 toy guns from my bag, the kind that shoot those rubber balls and foam bullets. I laid one on each grave. If the kids couldn't find peace, at least they should have something to play with. That uneasy feeling I'd always felt at the park faded after that day, though it never quite disappeared entirely. It was like I'd earned some of their trust, but not all of it. I still made sure to be out of that park well before sunset, though. Until one day, a few months later, we realised my daughter had left her favourite water bottle at the park, and my wife sent me to retrieve it. I had tried to think up an excuse to get out of it, but what could I really say? That I was too scared to go to the park after dark? So reluctantly, I approached the park. One of the swings was rocking back and forth, but as I approached it, it slowed to a stop. I called out, telling the kids that I just wanted the water bottle and then I'd leave them alone. I found the bottle sat at the foot of the slide and was making my way to the exit when something struck the back of my head. My heart leapt into my throat, but as I turned around, I saw a single Nerf bullet lying on the floor behind me. I smiled. Good shot, I called into the darkness and hurried back to the house. I'm not so scared of that park anymore, but I still avoid it as much as I can, particularly after dark. I'm an intruder there. I don't belong. It belongs to the children.